Good afternoon. Welcome back from the break. Welcome to our panel on port electrification. So, yes, I'm Adam Goldstein. I'm co-chair of the Energy Security Leadership Council, executive chairman of KNNX. Probably for the purposes of this panel, it's more relevant that I was 32 years at Royal Caribbean, working on our offices on the port of Miami. Ports are as complex as they are vital. Even this sophisticated audience probably doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about ports, but if you do for even a few seconds, you will of course recognize that without what ports do, none of us would be able to have the life that we lead. But ports are daunting places, complex, and so I look forward to speaking with our panelists about a number of the challenges and opportunities that relate to electrification. So what I'd like to do is go quickly through the panel and have everybody introduce themselves, their name, their position, and how their company relates to port electrification, and then we'll go from there. Chris, why don't you start?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. My name is Chris Nordh. I'm the Senior Vice President and Head of North America for ABB E-Mobility. We're one of the largest manufacturers of charging infrastructure in the world, having deployed over 1 million chargers across 84 countries, of which 50,000 have been DC fast chargers. And around 10,000 of those have been here in North America, across some of the networks that you all probably know very well.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Henrik Holland. I am the Global Head of Mobility at Prologis. Prologis is one of the bigger names in logistics that you might never have heard of. We are the world's largest logistics real estate company. We operate more than 1.2 billion square feet of real estate space in 19 countries. We are very heavily present in many of the focused port areas, for example, those that were mentioned in the Zero Emissions Freight Corridor strategy that came out yesterday. Our mobility business, we founded that 3 years ago to support our customers' transition to zero emissions transportation. We own and operate EV charging infrastructure. We have more than 2.5 million miles of electrified charging on our platform already, and it's a real pleasure to be here today.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Safe, for putting together these 2 days. They've been absolutely fascinating. It's a real honor to be a part of this and join this community. I'm Michelle Avary. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs at Einride. And probably a lot of you are not familiar with us, but we do run the largest fleet of heavy-duty electric trucks in the U.S. We're operational in 8 states. We'll be rolling out about 14 more. We also run the largest fleet of heavy-duty electric trucks in Europe. And to date, we've already reduced 6 million kilograms of CO2. So we're not just a PowerPoint presentation talking about this. We're delivering this as well, our clean emissions. Our ecosystem comprises of our connected heavy-duty electric trucks, which we buy from a whole bunch of different OEMs. We also have autonomous heavy-duty electric trucks. We build out charging infrastructure with some great partners as well. We definitely do not do this alone. And we have a digitalization platform that helps us not only manage the efficiency and utilization of these vehicles, but also that energy usage. We are operational on many ports here in the United States, including Los Angeles and Long Beach, as well as Savannah. So if you will, we're like the demand for what's happening on ports with our trucks.
Thank you, Michelle. Karl?
And I'm Karl Simon. Glad to be here as well and glad to spend some time with my panelists here. So I work at the EPA. Probably have heard of us, I think, I would imagine. My particular office has the pleasure of being able to implement our ports initiative, which has been going on for over a decade. And then Congress gave us the added task of trying to figure out how to allocate $3 billion under the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's what I'm focused on lately.
And don't worry, we will come back to Karl on the money. So the complexity of ports, as I've already mentioned, from cargo handling equipment like yard tractors and top loads, drayage trucks, the ships themselves, shore power that could be applied to the ships while they're in port. We've heard a lot the last 2 days about all different aspects from minerals to markets with the challenges that face the country for its national security. It's really hard to imagine that there are a few more important and challenging nodes in that chain than what happens at ports. And I'm really curious if each of you could speak to why do you see it as being worth your while to take on one of the most daunting areas of the entire electrification ecosystem as it relates to ports? So Chris, we'll start with you and go through.
All right, great question. Probably a pretty tough one there. Yeah, we have been successful in several other areas, and I'll talk about how that relates. So the municipal bus sector is another aspect where heavy-duty applications are being electrified. And the same thing goes for the heavy-duty trucks that are operating within the port systems. So the equipment side has already been proven out in several other segments of the market, and so the ports represent such a significant part of our infrastructure, import and export of goods, and we see that it's one of the areas that also create currently a lot of the pollution. We're seeing some of the oldest trucks being used in the ports, and so it becomes imperative from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective to actually target these areas that has such an incredible impact. And a lot of the ports are actually in our cities. Michelle mentioned, the Port of Long Beach and LA. The vehicles that are being used there have a direct impact on our own health inside of the cities. And so I think that it's critical for us to take on this challenge, as big as it is, and electrify those vehicles for the health of, all of us and the people living in these cities.
Henrik?
So just maybe to build on what Chris mentioned, I think that impact is a really important reason to attack electrification at ports. As it comes to our portfolio, we have a net zero ambition by 2040, and that aligns very well with what many of our customers, which is some of the world's largest e-commerce and logistics players, how they're looking at the world. And with 70% of the freight in the U.S. going over roads, a lot of that comes through our ports. These ports are a very important and critical component of that net zero strategy. I also think that short-haul heavy-duty electric is a really, really fantastic use case for electric vehicles, and therefore is a great kind of first step in the journey to heavy-duty vehicle electrification. And that, again, to reference the zero-emissions freight corridor strategy that came out yesterday again. If you look at the first phase there, a lot of the work is centered around these ports for that, presumably for that reason as well. So I think in terms of getting the industry going, in terms of its logistics decarbonization and transportation, it is the use case that we have to win, I think, over the next few years, and where we need to see some real success, and will see some real success, which will then support a trickle-down, I think, effect into other parts of the value supply chain.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, Henrik is he's spot on. At Einride, we really focus on very high-density lanes that are short, medium haul, and that are very predictable. So we haul a lot of consumer goods, we haul a lot of groceries, we haul mining equipment out of Savannah. It's not just potato chips. But those are the lanes, particularly, that you see in those ports. There's just a lot of availability of those predictable lanes that you can begin moving at. And those are ideal for the type of performance that we're seeing in these vehicles as well. Now, most of our trucks are more depot charging as well, which has a different element to it when we start thinking about those ports. But when you look at moving from the port into the distribution centers that tend to be right in that area, that's a very ideal for us as well. And we know the reality is about the majority of the way goods are moving, easily half of it can be addressed from electric trucks now. And if we prove this out in this port and the port environment, we can continue building out those various hubs, like the strategy that we heard announced yesterday, and build upon it to bring those efficiencies that we need in the area.
So before we go to Karl, I just want to mention a couple of things. One statistic is that more than 80% of drayage trucks going in and out of ports are on routes that are 60 miles or less driven, which certainly lends itself to what Michelle was talking about. And the other thing is that they tend to be sort of the last stage in the life cycle of a truck. So by the time trucks become drayage trucks, it's their third or fourth or fifth life. And that's why around the country, they tend to be the oldest and most polluting types of vehicles possibly on the road altogether. And one other thing about ports to bear in mind is that ports are at the intersection of two different types of environmental concerns, which also affect maritime. There's obviously greenhouse gas emissions, carbon, and then there's the local pollutants of particulate matter, nitrous oxide, and sulfur dioxide. So ports have to deal with both pollution control regimes in a way that really no other place has to worry. But Karl, ports for the EPA.
Oh, all of the above. Great. I mean, I think the answers that from Chris, Henrik, and Michelle, and Adam, you too, all fit. We started the ports work for the first reason, which is improving the lives of people that live, work, and engage in the ports community because of all the things you all said in terms of the emissions impacts from the operations that happen at these very industrial operation centers and exactly where they're located in areas where people now live. So that's the driver of kind of has been driving our program over the years. And I think we've now been able to see the benefit through the decarbonization blueprint that the administration put out last year that talks about net zero by 2050 and trying to think about when you start to think about turnover for fleets, the urgency of doing work now to get to fleet turnover really is important. So that's a driver in that as well too. And I think to your point of the greenhouse gas and the criteria pollutants, zero solves a lot of problems, right? It addresses both things. So there's win-wins there too. So you can get that efficiency of a certain control strategy and address a number of issues in terms of noise and operations and pollution in one fell swoop.
So Karl, sticking with you, the EPA is, as a part of, I think, the overall legislative environment of the last couple of years, is in a position to be much more supportive and aggressive financially to spur some of the desired activity than in the past. So if you could just sort of set out for our audience some of the recent notifications that you've put out and sort of the construct that people should be thinking about if they want to engage in investment in the port environment.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a little crazy to think about the amount of money that we have now kind of that we've been asked to distribute into the port sector, and it's a good problem to have. So as you noted, we have $3 billion in funding under the Inflation Reduction Act that we put out a notice on one grant program. So those of you interested, the clock is ticking. We're down to less than 90 days. That covers all operations at ports, so all transportation sources from forklifts to shore power for ocean-going vessels, as well as associated infrastructure, because we want to make sure it's not just about getting the vehicles and the cranes and everything else there. You got to get power to them. So you need to do that. So we can pay for some of those things. We also carved out a bunch of money for planning because a lot of ports, there's hundreds of, dozens of ports around the country. Some are better situated for being able to take advantage of this money. So we want to be able to provide support for that. So that clock is ticking. We just did a webinar. Actually, it may be wrapping up now on that information. So if anybody's interested, I would go to Clean Ports, our Clean Ports website, all sorts of information there. But we're not the only ones playing in the port space. I think what Adam, what you talk about is thinking about kind of that federal collective tissue here. So you've got, if you're thinking about battery production, there are tax credits for battery production and use. If you're thinking about hydrogen as a fuel that could potentially be used in various ports operations. Department of Energy announced their hydrogen hubs earlier this year. Our friends at MARAD just did an announcement for their PIDP program, which is a port-focused program. That's crazy. We talk about big. I think that was $400 and some odd million, which again is a lot of money. But all of this, as we think about this, is also seed money because we know the need is greater than what we are able to provide here. So we're trying to use this money, but also encourage private sector partnerships with the applicants as well too, because we know, and then we've got 3 examples here of people doing really good, interesting work in this space. So trying to really kind of harness that opportunity and those funding opportunities.
Thank you very much. So each of our other panelists are, of course, engaged in initiatives that are specific and making accomplishments. Michelle, if we start with you, you mentioned, I think, Savannah in passing. You have a partnership, for example, with Wallenius Wilhelmsen there.
We do.
Please comment on that or any of your other initiatives and how that relates to potentially, let's say, partnership with EPA or...
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for that. I really appreciate that you included monies in there for planning because, as I had mentioned, part of our Einride's ecosystem is our digitalization platform and really using these current technologies to drive better efficiencies across that entire value chain. And so getting the data you need to understand the lanes that you can electrify now is non-trivial. So that is really, really important to understand what are those high density lanes that are predictable and that are going to work within the range of the truck. And then also where are you going to be able to install no regret charging in those right stair steps, because you don't need to drop in these large mega charging stations all at once. You can do this in a sane way, and that's something that we've done in Savannah, is make sure that for the trucks that we're operating, that we're dropping in the right size of the charging infrastructure and then grow with those expanded lanes that you're going to operate. So that's one of the important things, and I really appreciate that. When we add that digitalization, one of the things that we're able to do is to be able to tell with extreme precision when we need power, and we can share that information, which drives that greater efficiencies and also doesn't overwhelm the utilities and the regulators. They have to have the ability to catch the data, which you can't always promise that they're going to be ready for. But we're ready to engage in those discussions to show how we can share a lot of this information. One of the things personally I'd love to see is preferred access for EVs. Absolutely biased completely, but if you give us these preferred lanes like we have in California, we know that we can turn faster and then help address some of those pollution issues. So that's something we don't have in Savannah, but we'd love to see that grow a lot more.
Well, before we finish, we will construct a list of our wants.
Thank you. There we go.
So, Henrik, I know, for example, you have had a partnership with Maersk in California, but maybe you'd like to comment on that or some other specific initiatives that Prologis is involved in.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Adam. And as I mentioned, we've electrified more than 2.5 million miles. So I think what I'd really love folks to take away is that this is real, right? This is happening. These aren't just pilot projects for operators. Our work with Maersk is a really great example of that. They've been really at the forefront of this transition initially in California and expanding that a little bit outside of California as well. We've publicly announced 2 projects with Maersk. Again, really good use cases for EV. These are deployments at warehouse locations. So we believe that what is required to make the transition to electric logistics work is a network of sites. So not just dedicated charging hub locations, but lots of more kind of decentralized depot or warehouse-based charging, which then together as a network provides operators with the capacity they require to charge. So we built 2 of those warehouse-based charging projects with Maersk and ABB equipment back in 2021, 2022 already. Great collaboration with the utility, with SCE. And what's really exciting to see about these projects and the work that we're starting to do with customers and have done with customers is that it often starts like within a Prologis facility, but quickly it has been expanding outside of Prologis facility. And that's just a great thing to see that, we see the kind of the oil stain expanding in terms of deployments. So again, really great examples, I think, for short haul heavy duty. And that operations team, I don't want to speak for our customers on this per se, but it's been a fantastic journey to see how that operations team has been learning how to utilize these trucks in real life. Again, this is real life stuff. They're not pilot projects, so reliability is key. And the utilization of those trucks is just going up and up and up. So it takes our customers generally a while on these fleets to get to know how to operate these vehicles, but there are some really amazing examples in the market right now.
Thank you. So, Chris, maybe you could comment, and not necessarily only about, let's say, what you've been involved in the U.S., but given the global footprint of ABB, have you seen initiatives in other parts of the world that we should be mindful of here as we progress?
Yeah, so I would say that our global aspect is giving us a lot of lessons across multiple customers, use cases, and what you're seeing in common with everything that's being discussed here today is the aspect around reliability and sweating the assets, right? Utilization being the absolute key to making sense of this. And so what we've done more recently is create a global charger operations center, which is combining all of the learnings from these different operations in order to create a single organization that manages diagnostics case management. And then that organization pushes down into the local group the instructions for what it is that needs to be repaired and how to do it, as well as dispatching parts. And so now we have this singular organization that basically brings everything in, teaches each other about that. And I don't think that there's enough of companies that are setting up organizations in such a way in order to share that learning. And so the things that we are experiencing in the Netherlands, for example, or even abroad in Asia, are being applied right here in North America as some chargers get rolled out in other parts of the world faster than others.
Thank you very much. So I want to come back again on the topic of drayage, possibly because I just like to say that word. But by the way, I asked ChatGPT, preparing for this panel, where does this drayage word come from? And a dray was a cart, a low, strong cart without sides that carried heavy loads. And somehow that morphed into short-haul trucks going in and out of ports on a regular basis. Go figure. But Michelle, one of the things that we were talking about is, in the quest for progress, are there alternative business models that could be applied? Because one of the things that is also true of drayage truck owner-operators is they tend to have very small fleets, possibly just a mom-and-pop one-truck operation. And so when you think old trucks, dirty trucks, trucks not held in large fleets, how are we going to get to a fully electrified fleet? Maybe you could comment in some more detail.
Yeah, that's really the sweet spot for Einride, for our business model, is that we're very efficient with our capital, and we're allow our shippers to be able to make that change from diesel to electric, not only a lot more affordable, but also a lot faster. One is because we've had all those learnings over the years. We've been in business since 2016, is to understand that. But we really do the soup to nuts. So we buy these tractors from our OEM partners, and then we can operate them, bring insurance, drivers, the maintenance. We do a lot of training for EV technicians as well. And then obviously with the bringing in the charging infrastructure as well. And we have longer term contracts for the shipping for each of those goods. So it's a different model as to how you look at it than the traditional way that you buy shipping. With that key that Henrik and Chris and others have talked about, which is that efficiency. Because right now the systems aren't efficient. When you look at the way that these diesel trucks are utilized, they aren't highly utilized. And that just has to stop. We really need to be a lot more thoughtful with how we're using these and utilizing them at those higher rates to make the business economics work. And that's where the digitalization comes in. And that's really what we're focusing on, is high utilization, very, very efficient, which is able to bring those rates down considerably. And that's where we're going to win in this marketplace, not just because it's really good for the environment for reducing CO2 and NOx, but because the unit economics work for everyone.
So, Karl, the ports aren't the entity that owns the drayage trucks typically. They're privately owned by owner-operators, small companies, as I just said, quite often. So when you think about people submitting applications for funding through the program that you described, how would we address this concept of getting drayage operators to move from where they are today to where we need them to be?
That's a great question, and we're looking forward to seeing what we get from folks in terms of creative business models. I mean, I do think that the statute does restrict us in some of these, where we can give money out to, but it in other ways is pretty expansive in terms of that partnership with that port authority or the state agency that, for example, is in there. So I think we haven't said it yet, so we'll say it. If you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So we really anticipate kind of a wide range of opportunities, then are looking forward to hearing kind of what people come to this space. But it is a challenge, right? The business model is very small in many ways. So we're supportive, but also interested in how people come and approach this challenge.
Thank you. So, Chris, coming back to you, one of the things that always interests me in any discussion like this, but particularly with this topic, is what would success actually look like? Like, if you think forward, maybe not even all the way to 2050, although that's not that far away because ships being built now are meant to be operating in 2050. So if whatever characteristics you have, you're going to be part of that 2050 net zero equation already. But in your mind, let's say over the transition into the next 20, 25 years, what would a successful port electrification outcome look like?
It's a great question. I would approach it from two separate angles, one from the charging equipment side and one from the vehicle side. And I'm going to go back to the idea of utilization. The systems and the business models that Michelle was referring to that can create truck sharing and truck as a service or fleet as a service are really there in order to enable individuals to use equipment during the time of day that they choose to use it, and then perhaps a second user during that same time. And so if a model is created that allows that truck to be in use throughout the entire day, and therefore also the charger to be in use throughout the entire day, right now we're seeing usage patterns in the CPO space, or the Electrify Americas of the world, at around 15 to 20%, probably as a high point. At 30%, you start really seeing dissatisfaction among the users, because then the lines develop and people are waiting there for a while. So if you can create a model where you're seeing 40, 50% utilization of these assets, which means they make financial sense, and then ports are starting to implement that, and over time converting to eventually 100% conversion, then you've truly seen success, both from an environmental perspective and then the financial aspect.
Thank you. Henrik?
So as it comes to the ports, there's kind of two components that come to mind for me. One is we've talked a lot about drayage, because it is a great word to say, but there's a lot of on-site, on-port equipment as well that is, ready for electrification. Think about yard tractors or yard hostlers, what have you. So I think a future where the not just environmental footprint, but the cost basis of the port is improved through the smart deployment of that kind of technology, I think is really, really important and a huge opportunity. Then as it comes to the port itself is kind of a node in a larger network. So I think if you kind of take a step back and look at, well, what is the vision of the future there? Is that not just that node, but the facilities and the environment? You mentioned, was it 80% of drayage routes are less than 60 miles. So the facilities in that environment, the warehouses in that environment, that there is a seamless network that enables zero emissions hauling of those goods and services. And that could be electric, but it could also be hydrogen, right? And the way that I think about that as it comes to like a warehouse portfolio and being at a warehouse logistics real estate company, it's like we're the second largest corporate operator of rooftop solar in the country. And why is that? It's because that's where the space is. That's where the roof space is. So if I look at the future, I see a dense network of charging deployed, both at the port and at these facilities that enable efficient, high utilization moving of goods. And this is for the unit economics, but it's also just better from a use of the planet's resources perspective. It's more efficient as a whole. So we're going to be improving from an energy balance as a whole. So that, I think, is a really, really bright future. And I think we're just starting to make the first steps in that direction.
Thank you. Michelle?
It's blue skies. And I don't mean that flip. Maybe it's because I know you live in LA and I lived in LA for a long time. And you can really see that, particularly with those two ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, because there's that bowl. You can literally see the brown skies over there. It just sucks. So if we're really successful here, be able to see blue skies and also the noise, the reduction of the noise. When you actually ride in an electric truck, you never want to go back to a diesel truck. It is an incredible improvement. But you also think about being around it and around that noise, and being able to reduce that noise pollution is also, I think, one of the things that we're going to see that's going to be really amazing as we begin rolling out these technologies en masse. And they do tend to be concentrated in these areas, not just the seafaring ports, but also the inland ports, like what we see in places around in Chicagoland and stuff like that, which also has some really serious particulate matter issues of pollution as well. So really cleaning those up and sooner rather than later. And I would love to see that push towards getting more renewable energy in these spaces that we can take advantage of, including obviously the solar that you put in there. I think that's going to be essential.
Thank you. Karl?
So I'm going to think about this near, mid, and long term, because the answers that you all said are really thoughtful and all make sense to me. So in the near term, making a difference in the people's lives that live, work, and commute around the port, so blue sky. Really reducing pollution, reducing noise in that space. That has to be, and showing that progress so that people get excited about it, because we can't do everything all at once. I appreciate Henrik mentioning the corridor charging strategy, and for those of you that haven't seen it, it's a 4-stage process that we've laid out. So ports are going to be the same way. They're going to be, some people are going to be really out in front, and we want everybody else to kind of see the art of the possible that aren't maybe necessarily ready to go that route. But we think everybody can do something. So that's the near term, improving people's lives. Midterm would be, this is the economics work, right? So we've reduced costs for batteries. We've figured out business models. We've figured out opportunities for people to play in this zero emission space, from dray trucks. drayage. It is a good word. I will give you that. That's gonna stick with us all, I think. But also ship emissions. We hear from communities when the shore power isn't operating. The shore power operation is operating because they see it immediately. So thinking about stuff there for the larger vessels, and then the long term, 2050 net zero carbon, right? I mean, we've put out that marker in the blueprint. So it's a lot of work. We recognize we're asking people to do a crazy amount of things in the near term, but the excitement that we hear from people for the challenge and the opportunities that they see to make a huge difference in the way that these really important economic hubs for the country operate, the vision is really positive at the end of the day.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly comment on shore power, make sure it's clear to everybody. This has been a big topic in the cruise industry for at least 10 years, and several European countries were ahead of this country in sort of beginning to think about and address shore power. So big ship comes into the port, it has an electric utility on board that powers the ship, obviously much more on cruise ships than on cargo ships. And we're talking about unplugging the utility for 12 hours, completely, darkness, and replugging in power that comes from the land, and 12 hours later, unplug the power coming from the land and replug in the power that's coming from the onboard utility. It is more than just sticking the plug in the wall, I assure you. But it's progress that needs to be made. Anyway, for our last question, what I wanted to do is take advantage of the fact that we don't have any ports on our panel, and we have very interested parties here who work with ports, as you've been hearing. What message would you like to deliver to ports and port operating companies about the future that we're proceeding into here with electrification? Chris?
I would love for you to approach this with a really open mind. I think that there's opportunities, like we've talked about a little bit, of expanding business models. So expanding your horizons and your set of responsibilities to take a more active role in providing solutions that will enable the electrification of these vehicles, I think would be really great. We can't do this without a partnership. It really does take a village, and that includes hardware provider, real estate providers, vehicle operators, software players. It really requires several entities to come together in order to create these solutions. And that does need, for you to change the way that you approach problems. And so just have an open mind and listen to proposals, exactly as Karl will be doing here. And hopefully, don't stay too far inside of the box. So,
thank you. Henrik?
Well, the time is now, because I heard 90 days left.
Right. Get your proposals.
Less than 90 days, so the time is now. And think creatively about what you can do at the port. For example, what kind of land you might be able to use and make available, but also think outside of the boundaries of the port to solve these issues, and think about partnerships, as Chris pointed out.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of those points. Move faster. We really don't have much time left to get this done. Time is of the essence. The bit about being open to change, it is hard. We know for a fact that when you go from running a diesel truck to running an electric truck, your processes will change. And change is not easy, and it does need to be thoughtful, but you have to be very open to it and looking at it holistically and knowing that you are going to need a lot more partners. It's going to take an ecosystem approach. And as you said, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So we know there is not going to be just one solution to this. So it is that speed, that openness to change, and willingness to embrace the partnership and different points of view and perspectives to the problems.
So, Karl, besides that, everybody should get their applications in. We give you the last word.
Yeah, and I need to be a little careful here. This is not grants guidance, just for the record. So, but I think all the things that you heard from my colleagues all make sense. I would just add on top of the broader high level ones is, if you're not talking to your utility, you need to be talking to your utility and maybe utilities, because we're talking about big areas here now, because that is a consistent message we hear from folks, and that infrastructure timeline may be longer than you've anticipated. So it really does take that creative opportunity, but also partnerships, because that's how these things are going to get done.
Super. Perfect. Right on time. Please thank our panelists, and thank you also to the audience.